All right, guys, welcome to Wide Awake News Radio. I am your host, Charlie McGrath. Sorry, folks, watching on Justin TV. I just shot forward. It probably looked like I was coming through the camera there. This is the 28th day of November, Wednesday. We have a great program lined up for you guys tonight. We have Lars from across the pond. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. We might have Jesse Beltran joining us here in just a minute. But we're going to, regardless, Lars and I are going to hang out. If Jesse can make it, that is awesome. If he can't, that's fine, because we know he's working on a few projects, so it is understandable. If you're listening and not one of the folks in the chat room, please go to, which is what I'm doing right now, because I'm not one of the folks in the chat room yet. I'm going to wideawakenews.com. I'm going to click on the Wide Awake Radio microphone on the right-hand side and join the folks in chat. And you can participate in the program via questions through chat, or you can call in at 877-342-6673. And let's get this thing rolling. You know, I have a little bit of financial stuff I want to cover. I might save that until the second half. We have all these bigwigs rolling into the White House, meeting on how they're going to solve the fiscal cliff issue. Guys, listen to me right now. I'm just going to say this, and I'm going to change the topic. The fiscal cliff. I'm going to say this real clear. The fiscal cliff is a canard. The fiscal cliff is a tool that is going to be used in a governed by crisis country and a governed by crisis planet in order to strip you of more of your freedom by piling more and more and more debt on top of it. It is nothing more than a umbrella that is going to be used to give political cover to both teams, blue and red, in order to implement austerity onto the people of this country. That is what the fiscal cliff is all about. That's what it's going to be used for. And the 100-point rally on the Dow today, forget about that noise. We will see a shock to our system very, very soon that will make a malleable populace stand up and beg Congress to do something in order to make sure that the Dow, the biggest indicator in people's lives on the health of the economy, the Dow doesn't fall anymore. All right, let's bring on our guest, Lars Drudgaard. How are you, my friend? Thank you very much for hanging out with us at whatever time it is, 2 a.m. Is that what you're doing at?
It's 2 in the night here, and thank you very much, Charlie, for having us on.
It's very it's always great to have you on. How are you?
I'm actually fine. I'm fine. But we are going to have recently there have been some developments in ISA Act.
Because let's give that. Let me give that out first, and then I'll stop interrupting you, and I'll turn it over to you. The website is the International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. This isn't the first time Lars has been on. Him and Jesse have both been on a number of times. We've had him on talking about reported and proven cases of people having implants put into their person without their knowledge. This abuse of covert technology. And these guys are fighting hard to wake the planet up to this dubious act that is happening as we speak. I mean, it happens without our knowledge, without our consent, and these guys are doing all they can to fight this. All right, their website is ICAT.org, ICAACT, ICAT. You know what? I don't like I don't like trying to say that because it doesn't sound right. ICAACT.org is their website, or you can type in International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. That is their site. Please go there, support these guys any way you can. Lars, continue. The site does look different from the last time I've been here.
Yeah, we just had a little revamp of our webpage. The original one was done very, very fast, and now we had a lot of people stepping up around the globe, helping us out and becoming more professional and going globally sort of more intensely. And we have a new webmaster who created this webpage. She's from Spain. Her name is Carmen Lupan. And we are very, very thrilled with the new webpage and the look we have.
Yeah, it looks great. It looks great. Yeah. I mean, it's a very nice looking site. The other one was a little, I think you're right. The other one was a little bit more confusing. And this one certainly, and I just got a message. I have to, okay, I just got a message from Jesse, and I want to give this to Gary, because Gary's waiting for his request. Gary, he's telling me in Skype that he's not received a request, but he's having PC problems. So maybe go ahead and send him that request again. and we'll try to get Jesse on as well. Um, what's new in the field of covert technology abuse? I mean, you know, we've had you, Jesse, and others on talking about some of the technology that's been implanted in people. Maybe we should cover that a little bit just to bring people up to speed on,
Yeah.
and we can give your story if you like, Lars.
Yeah. I don't know. My original story is I became a victim of this in January 2009, where I started to sense that someone was tracking me, and it took me quite a couple of years actually to realize how this was done. And after that 2 years, I started an international Skype call, and from that. One day, Jesse Beltran came online. He had been in contact with a physician, a doctor in Texas, who had found out that some of the victims of these symptoms emit radio frequencies, and he was going to do some radio frequency scanning. And I was very interested in this, so I got him to send me some equipment from the United States, and we decided to create ISA-ACT, International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies. Jesse did a tour in the United States where he was traveling around and scanning people with those specific symptoms, and I was doing the same in Europe. And that's how we got started a little more than a year ago. And it's been very, very interesting, actually. We've devised a free-phase scanning process where we use radio frequency scanners initially to scan for just radio frequencies. And this is, people have to understand that this is not normal. People don't naturally emit radio frequencies. So there's definitely something going on. To verify that these radio frequencies that we emit are actually something unnatural, our second phase would be to get medical images like X-rays, etc., to see if there's anything unusual in the body that should emit those frequencies. That is phase 2. And phase 3 is to continue the radio frequency scanning in a Faraday cage, a shielded environment, to completely rule out that any frequencies come from the outside. And recently we've just moved to phase 3 and had access to this, and this is the most recent development.
Okay, so yeah, and that is new. That got my attention when you said Faraday cage, because, and I think Jesse is joining us now as well. Jesse, welcome to the program. Listen, I know you're a really busy guy, and I really appreciate you taking time to come on with Lars and I tonight.
No problem, Charlie. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
It's always a pleasure to have you on. We can keep this game of complimenting each other going for another hour, and then we'll let you go.
No.
All right, Jesse, tell me about this new process. And Lars, this kind of filled us in on a little bit of background here. But the thing he said towards the end of that, about a minute before break, so you might have to carry this over. But the new testing, he said, you guys are just recently able to achieve is in a Faraday cage. Is that accurate?
That is correct. It is a controlled environment. It was a research facility. It's a brand new Faraday cage that was recently certified, and its specs were to block out frequencies from approximately 9 hertz to 18 gigahertz in that spectrum. And what was interesting is that we were detecting frequencies within that spectrum inside the Faraday cage from individuals who had been previously tested in a preliminary scan. We also had a control group, those who were not complaining of these types of symptoms. And when we put the frequency counters up to them, the frequency counter would read 0. So this was very, very compelling. Lars and I
Absolutely.
Lars and I are being very reserved about what we're doing with this. We also have.
All right, hold tight.
Yeah.
Hold tight. The music cut you off there a little bit, and what Jesse said is Lars and himself have been very reserved about this information. We're going to talk more about this on the backside of this break, guys. We'll be back with Lars Drudgaard and Jesse Beltran in just a few minutes with more Wide Awake News Radio. Okay, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. Charlie McGrath, your host, joined by Lars Drudgaard and Jesse Beltran. Their website is icaact.org, or you can simply type in International Center Against Abuse of Covert Technologies and go to their revamped website. It looks really great, guys. Tell your Spanish webmaster she's doing a fantastic job. Now, Lars gave us a little bit of an update that their testing methodology has expanded to a Faraday cage. And now I want to explain real quick and then turn it over to these guys to explain, how big of a deal this is. A Faraday cage, you surround, you can, if you have technology that is sensitive to electronic impulse, like an EMP, where it's circuitry that can be affected by electrostatic electricity or even magnetic fields or that kind of thing. If you have a Faraday cage, it's basically surrounding it in metal, so it is not influenced by any outside electrical source. I think I'm explaining this right, Jesse. And to me, this is a big deal if you're trying to find out if there is a frequency, if there is an electronic frequency being broadcast from a human being. If you put them inside of a Faraday cage and they're still broadcasting, that's pretty definitive. Jesse? Lars?
Well, like I said, Lars and I are being very reserved and cautious about the data currently. What we are doing is we have some outside experts. We want a third-party review over the data before we come to any conclusion. But indeed, what you're saying is correct. There's a couple of possibilities. You have to ask if we are getting frequencies that are in the range that the Faraday cage is specified at to block out, then one would have to come to the conclusion that the frequencies are coming within the Faraday cage. And based on the control group, who were very credible people, there in Europe, Belgium specifically, and we very much appreciated their participation. And without them, this phase 3 testing would not have been a success. And when I mean a success is that we were able to bring people from all over the globe to participate, who had participated in our previous preliminary scanning for RF emissions. And that's where we're at right now. Once we come out with the conclusion, we will disclose that. But this is something exciting, and Lars and I are just, we're just anxious to move forward so that we can once and for all expose the truth, and then that's all we're seeking.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Lars, did you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, maybe I'll just elaborate a bit on the control group. We had some people in there who had no symptoms, who had not previously been scanned, but were not victims of this technology. And the interesting thing is the readings on those people were absolutely zero in the Faraday cage. And that is very indicative of those who do have symptoms, that they have something is different. So if we combine that with the medical images, X-rays, MRI scans, etc., I think we are gradually building some kind of a good case.
Well, I think you guys have been building a great case for quite some time now. What is the response of I hate to use this word, leadership, but Jesse, Lars, I know you guys are not just you're not just putting this information on your website and letting it filter out on its own. You guys are very positive in taking action in trying to awaken the world to what's going on by going to people in positions of leadership. Is there anything new to report there as far as response from so-called leadership?
Well, I could say this, that recently in Congress, there was a closed session with regards to these types of technology, and more specifically, and I hate to use this term or this label, but more specifically the use of mind control type techniques to manipulate people and control populations. There was it was a senator out of the state of Missouri who had called this, and so it is trickling up the echelon. We have also been in contact with the Department of Homeland Security, as I mentioned in previous shows, but recently we're in Washington, D.C., and I was specifically point blank told that indeed these technologies do exist. They have been being used for some time, and the images that we had produced as evidence, we were told, were an older technology. Now we are moving into fiber optic type RFID technologies, which are very, very difficult to detect, which are basically a hair's width, which would never be, they would never show up on an MRI scan, an X-ray, or those type of images. So what we're having to do, and what Lars and I are expounding on, is that it looks like these newer technologies are using medical imagery may not be the direction to go in, but we are moving towards the technology field in itself and using tools in these types of arenas in order to figure out what's going on with these people who are suffering from these types of symptoms.
Yeah, well, and about to bump up against the second break, we probably should cover a little bit, and we have to cut Jesse loose here a little bit early or towards the end of the next segment. And I'd like to get into a little bit of some of the notions that are coming to the forefront, especially you're talking to Homeland Security. You know, they're telling you that the technology you're bringing the pictures of is old. Did anybody offer any kind of an explanation of why on earth you're finding these devices implanted in people without their say so?
Well, that's
well, Jesse, hold on. Jesse, I'm really sorry. I knew that was going to happen. Sorry. That was my fault. We're going to take this break. We'll be back with Jesse Beltran, Lars Drudgaard, and more Wide Awake News Radio in just a minute, and we'll get Jesse to answer that question, and then I have a story I'd like to tell myself. All right, we'll be back here in just a few minutes. Okay, guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. We have Lars Drudgaard and Jesse Beltran as our guests, and we're going to lose Jesse here. We got about 8 minutes left with him. And if you were listening on Justin TV during the break there, you heard this conversation going on about how they power these devices. And Lars, Gary Hendershot, and myself will continue that conversation after the next break, or we might get into a little bit on this one. But the question that I'd like to get out there, you know, for the folks that haven't heard you when you were on earlier on the program, or haven't heard you before, is that I'm sure is floating around everybody's mind right now is why is this RFID technology? Why are we finding these in people? What would be the possible motivation, the purpose for implanting folks with a chip? What would it? Is it only a tracking device? Is it can they? Is there mind control, mind manipulation, or any other kind of physiological control that can occur with these kind of implants? And I'm gonna kick that over to Jesse first, since we're losing you first.
Okay. Yeah. You know, before we left, you asked what was being told to me when I was in Washington, and
Yes,
and that was interesting. A lot of the statements where that I was receiving is they could not confirm nor deny. That was the blanket statement. But they did say this. They were very interested in our data and what we were finding here in the United States, and then some of what we were finding in Europe. And they asked if this was very geographically specific, and the answer to that was yes and no. There are some hotspots in the United States, and those hotspots tend to be in the Bay Area of California, Texas, Florida, the and the East Coast, in New York, in that region. And they were asking me more specifically about my case, and their answers to me was that this is not just a local jurisdiction that's involved, that it has to be coming from higher up, and they were kindly inferring that to me. But the persons or individuals that I was speaking to were in charge of investigating basically crimes within the government, and they were taking this very seriously. Not only the RFID issue, but the possibilities that exposures to RF may have accidentally been being used on our soldiers. There is a high incident of suicide rates within. Lars, correct me if I'm wrong. It was within the Army or Marines, and they never thought about the possibility that exposure to radio frequencies could be the cause of this. So they were very interested in what we're finding, particularly what Barry Trower has been testifying to, and you can see that on our website. But that's where they're going. Why is it being done? It appears to be a lot of this is non-consensual experimentation. Some of it is revenge, and some of it specifically aimed at whistleblowers. And that tends to be the trend that we're finding.
Mm-hmm. Lars, did you want to comment on the whys and what fors?
Well, yeah, I think we are coming down with the conclusion that most of it is experimentation, and we know from the old projects that were carried out in the 50s and the 60s that basically they just choose random people who are often easily discredited to do research on, and with the symptoms they can induce in people, that would further discredit them and become lifelong research subjects. And that's
and you said the Bay Area, which is so are they seeing? I mean, military. I know that from the previous time you guys have been on, military has been a key component of the group that had the most type of positive testing when you guys have tested them for RFID broadcasting. Is that correct? But how about like you said, the Bay Area? How about like is the homeless and in the indigent? I mean, are we seeing a lot spikes in these populations?
There is a lot of that, but it's unknown on whether or not being exposed to this type of technology caused their homelessness, or because a lot of the victims tend to be very impoverished. And I mean, we have doctors, we have politicians, we have from the very educated to who were once very wealthy, to blue collar workers. It's affecting all demographics. So it is horrific. A lot of times it's very difficult to find those who are really undergoing the majority of the symptoms, or the high crescendo of the symptoms, to be functional. It's not a characteristic that is common amongst the victims.
Mm-hmm. And I would say both Jess and I belong to the minority of the victims group, as we pretty much know that this is related to intelligence services. In my case, it's military intelligence. In Jess's, it might be other intelligence services. But we are the majority of the victims groups that we are finding. So we would fall into the whistleblower, military intelligence, sort of listening in, eavesdropping, manipulation, etc.
And then the goal that you guys have determined, through your research and study. And Jesse, you have to take off now. Is that accurate?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do want to say one thing here.
Sure.
President Obama asked the Presidential Bioethics Commission to do a study and look into whether or not, and go on a fact-finding mission on whether or not non-consensual experimentation was still happening to American citizens. They were supposed to give that finding January of 2012. They held off on giving their conclusion because of the election. So we want to make sure we keep it out there that everyone listening is watching and waiting to hear what this conclusion will be. We know that over 300 victims appeared at the first Bioethics Commission to hear testimony from victims all over the United States. And then after that, they begin to censor them after every meeting. So we are waiting, we are watching, and once it does come out, if they tell the truth, the truth is the fact that it is still going on. We would like to know what they're going to do about it, if anything. And if not, then we need to continue the fight. We need to rise together, and we need to make sure that we stop this non-consensual human torture, because that's what it is. It's no different than terrorism. And as I've said before, you're either a terrorist or a treasonist when you condone or you engage in this type of activity against American citizens or any human being for that fact. And that's what we aim to stop, and this is what we want people to pay attention to. Please pay attention to what the Presidential Bioethics Commission is going to do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm sure that you will be keeping folks up to speed at icaact.org on any developments in that.
Yeah, that's true. Charlie, thank you very much for having me on your show. Lars and I appreciate everything that you do to get this out there. I apologize. I do have to cut this short, and I have to run. I do have a busy
I understand
schedule.
totally. Jesse Beltran, thank you very much. Thanks for your great work. Again, icaact.org is their website. Please check it out. Support them any way you can. Jesse will get you on again real soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Lars, I'm going to continue with you with the question of the whys and what fors. We have about a minute before this last break.
Yeah.
We've talked about the populace that's been affected. Where we see spikes in it, who the likely candidates would be. But let's quickly in a minute or so. The purpose, is it a tracking issue? Is it a manipulation issue?
It's both. It's both. I don't think it's a tracking issue, because that was solved long time ago. It's a manipulation issue, and it's global. We have it all around the globe. We have Japan, we have New Zealand, Australia,
Sure.
we have South Korea, we have Malaysia, India.
Laura, hang tight. I underestimated how much time I overestimated, rather.
Yeah, this is intelligence research.
Right. Okay, we'll pick it up there on the backside of this break we're going to take. Plus, Gary's going to join us because Lars has a question for him. We're going to be back with Lars Drudgaard, more Wide Awake News Radio in just a few minutes. Guys, welcome back to Wide Awake News Radio. I'm Charlie McGrath, your host. We're still joined by Lars Drudgaard and also Gary Hindershot now because there is some high-tech electrical engineer and sound engineer questions that they're going to banter back and forth off one another. And we might be lost in the technical mumbo-jumbo that's going to follow. It's still very interesting. If you're listening during the Justin TV break, if you're listening on Justin TV during the break, you heard the conversation continue. This is the last segment of the first hour. Coming up, hour number 2, we have Bob Fletcher from Bob Fletcher, private investigator, fascinating guy. He's going to have a lot of good information to bring to the program tonight. Lars, you started to explain we understand the how these technologies are ending up in people and the who's rather that they're ending up in. The why is the kind of the question that I'd like you quickly to answer. And I know it's not a quick, easy question to answer, but then we'll bring Gary on and you guys can talk engineer talk. But the why is the question.
Yeah, I think it's basically intelligence research to try to, and it's neurological research on how to manipulate people with different cultural backgrounds and different language backgrounds. And because we know it's worldwide and it's identical around the globe, it has to be either different intelligence communities working together on researching how to understand and interpret neurological data and influencing it. That's my take on it.
Well, and that makes sense. I mean, and it's fascinating to me that you're finding the same exact, copy of what's happening in the United States. You're seeing it happening in Europe. You're seeing it happening around the planet. Obviously, a global coordinated effort. Gary, Lars had a question for you during the JTV break. Lars, why don't you go ahead and revisit that question now?
Yes, Gary, you had a show where you had a guest named Dr. Patrick Flanagan on at one point.
Yes, Patrick Flanagan.
And I was very fascinated with that show because Dr. Patrick Flanagan had in the 50s invented a device called the neurophone.
Yeah, and that's kind of a predecessor technology to what we're talking about. But the neurophone was intended as a communications tool. And, the idea of, suppose you could answer your telephone without actually picking up the hook. You just, maybe pushed a bone in your head or something, you could have a non-physical attachment to a communications device or something of that nature. It was also assumed that this device could be used to plant thoughts in people's minds, or at least that's what military was interested in it for. But yeah, go ahead, Lars. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to steal the show.
I think that's he mentioned that the military did classify his inventions, but on the same show it was also mentioned that he mentioned Dr. Lilly and his works and the Lilly waves, and you had some comments in the break on that. I would like
the bottom line is our electricity here on the grid in the U.S. Is 60 cycle AC. Now, Lars, you're in Europe. You're on a 50 cycle AC system, but the idea is the same. Basically, they run a sine wave down the wires. It goes above the zero line, then it goes below the zero line, then it goes above the zero line, then goes below the zero line, and the frequency of that wave is either 50 cycles or 60 cycles, depending on whether you live here in the U.S. or perhaps live in Europe. Now, there's nothing sacred about 60 cycles. The guys who generate the electricity and push it across the grid could make that frequency anything they want it to be. They try and keep it right around 50 cycles or 60 cycles because that's what our electrical gadgets that we plug in expects to see. Now, one thing that you can do is you can impose additional frequencies. You can have your primary frequency, which in our case is 60 cycles. You can then impose any number of additional frequencies on top of that 60 cycles. And one of those frequencies that was discovered, I believe it was back in the early 1970s, and a lot of research was done by a couple of guys I know who did the Borderlands group. Something that was called the Lilly wave is a unique set of frequencies that have hypnotic type effects on human beings, or that's the best way I could put it, would be a hypnotic type effect. Now, I've never actually seen a Lilly wave. You need an oscilloscope to see it. But apparently these things have been discovered on the grid here in the United States by a number of amateur researchers with just modest equipment. It doesn't take real fancy equipment to find these things.
According to Flanagan, this is a specific mind control wave, and that's the scary part. That it was specifically developed for mind control purposes by Dr. Lilly.
Well, I'm not sure. Mind control might be taking a little too far. Let's say that people who are exposed to this set of frequencies, and it's a very complex waveform, but people who are exposed to this are subject to suggestion, much as someone who might have been hypnotized. Now, obviously, some people are more susceptible to hypnosis than others. Some people are going to be more susceptible to a Lilly wave exposure than others, but it can make you more accepting of suggestion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but what we are of course looking in ISAC, even though we are working towards the specific targeting of individuals, we are of course looking into all of those other technologies. And the interesting part is that we are finding that most victims are also victims of hypnosis, specifically of NLP programming, neuro-linguistic programming. And several of the symptoms that the victims are experiencing are actually induced through NLP programming. And that's why this part also becomes very interesting.
Something else I might put out there, just because it's a totally sidebar to our discussion. But one of the things that people have no idea is that you could run your cable TV, your telephone, everything, all the communications that you normally do, you could run across the AC power lines. That was known back in the 1930s, 1940s. It's just a capability that has never been exploited. We really don't need all these cables coming into our house. If you're connected to the grid, you've got the only connection you really need. You could be running your cable TV and your telephone right off of the AC power line. No problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was actually in 1998, there was a German television crew going to Russia. They were trying to expose some of the same technologies called psychotronics in Russia in Moscow. And there was a electronics engineer in that show who actually built a lot of filters for the victims to filter out those exact frequencies and mind control frequencies, because they had found out that some of the influencing did come from the grid at that point. So that actually connects very well with this Lily wave and the grid theory. But we know that this is not what we are specifically working on, but it is related, let's say, military and intelligence technology. Mm-hmm. Are you still?
Yes,
I'm here.
I'm still here. I was expecting Charlie to come in. So
No, I was listening. And what I was going to jump to is powering of the devices, powering of these implants. And sorry, Gary, I thought that was a question you were going to ask. That's why I was sitting.
No, actually, that is something that's of interest to me, because you know what, the devices we're talking about are extremely small. I mean, we're talking something that is really, really tiny. It doesn't really have what I would think would be the size to be able to produce these really long wavelengths. You need a fairly long antenna to do that, and of course we're talking about ELF waves, which are extremely low frequency radio signals. And the other interesting thing, of course, is power. Now we did engage in some of that discussion during the break, but you know, I don't think it'll become a part of the recording on YouTube. So we might want to cover that territory again. Lars, my question would be, have you been able to detect a power source for these things, or are you making the assumption that they're powered from maybe thermal energy generated by the human being? What is your thinking on how they're powered?
Initially, that's our main theory, is that they are powered by the body itself. There is a lot of articles out there actually about medical implant devices being powered, and I just put up a link here. I don't know if you can forward it. On that, this technology has been built and is used in medical implants. We have an alternative theory, is that a lot of victims also experience a tinnitus kind of symptom as well, in addition. That only comes in from time to time. It's not tinnitus, but it sounds pretty similar. This could be for powering the source, the outside frequency that that you mentioned earlier, that Charlie mentioned earlier, to beam in a signal, and this would be in the ultrasound, just above or very, very high, towards the higher end of our hearing threshold.
And this could, I mean, you're saying that this might be this symptom that seems a lot like tinnitus, which is a ringing in the ear, might be the actual power source itself.
It might be. We don't know. We haven't been able to locate it. There's two possibilities. Either they are powered by the human body itself, or this tinnitus-like signal might also be the source, because most of the victims do experience it, and it comes in basically daily. So for most of the victims.
So that's extremely interesting. What is coming up next? We're rapidly running out of time in this hour. What are we looking for? I mean, Jesse told us to keep an eye on Obama and the legislation coming down the road. Give us a quick synopsis of what we should be looking for.
Well, we should of course be looking for the presidential bioethics commission. Then, of course, looking at the results as we get this verified by experts, physicists, etc., our findings. Mm-hmm. And in addition, we are going to move closer to the politicians, maybe towards court cases, etc. So that's where we will really need the media to back us up, so we don't drown in that scenario.
No doubt about it, Lars. Listen, Lars Drudgaard, thank you very much. I appreciate you staying up till 3 o'clock in the morning over there across the ocean. Guys, all the information that you need to keep informed on and keep up to date on this topic can be found at ICAACT.org, the International Center Against the Use of Covert Technology. Lars Drudgaard, thank you very much for joining me on this hour. We'll get you back on again here in a month or so and get an update.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having us, Charlie. And thank you to you too, Gary. Yeah.
My pleasure.
As always, it's my pleasure.
Yeah.
Guys, please stay tuned. Hour number 2 is coming up here. We're going to take our long break. When we come back, we have Bob Fletcher of Bob Fletcher Investigations. Guys, an expert on everything from weather control to covert CIA operations, arms for drugs, that kind of thing. You're going to want to be in the chat. You're going to want to be listening because he's going to share a wealth of information. We're going to be back in just a few minutes. Please hang tight.